Chapter 23 of The Missing Chums by Franklin W. Dixon. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Home again. Tony Preto and his chums guided the landing party to the boulders behind which the gangsters and their captives had disappeared, but when Frank Hardy saw that the prey had flown, he assumed the role of guide. "They've gone up to the cave," he said. "I know the way." With Joe, he went in advance of the party. Tony, Phil, and Jerry came behind, with the officer and his men, their faces alight with anticipation of a battle, clambering up the hillside in their wake. The sturdy, tanned men were alert and ready for the approaching fight. Through the grove, down the leafy trail, the Hardy Boys led them, and at last they came within sight of the clearing. The great rock and the dark entrance of the cave were in sight. There was no sign of any human being. "Deploy," ordered the officer. The men scattered. The Hardy Boys and their chums, being unarmed, were obliged to watch from the shelter of the grove because they realized that there would probably be gunfire. The men began to make their way across the open space, running from rock to rock, keeping well scattered, all eyeing the entrance to the cave. Suddenly, a shot sounded from the cave entrance. Almost simultaneously, one of the revenue men fired. The boys had seen no one in the cave, but the keen eyes of the rifleman had, and when the body of the man slumped forward out of the cave, falling on the rocks, with a revolver clattering from his nerveless fingers, his judgment was verified. And this, to the disappointment of the watchers, was the end of the fight. For the gangsters, like so many of their kind, were cowardly, and they became unnerved at the fate of the first of their men who had shown fight. Out of the cave entrance came a man bearing aloft a white handkerchief in token of surrender. He was followed by the others, with hands upraised, and behind them came Chet Morton and Biff Hooper, their wrists still bound, but their faces alight with joy, in contrast to the surly visages of the gangsters. "Well, well," declared the officer in charge as he confronted the rascals, noting the frowning red-haired man, "if it isn't Red Hawkins and his gang. And you too, Pete. We've been looking for your hangout for the past 3 months, and for you as well. Put the cuffs on 'em, boys." In a few moments the gang were securely handcuffed. The man who had been shot was attended to, and it was found that he had been wounded, but after a brief examination and the rendering of first aid, the officer assured the victim that he would live to face trial with the rest for the abduction of Chet and Biff. "And if that charge falls through, which it won't," he assured them all, "we have a list of other charges against you as long as your arm." But the Hardy Boys and their chums were oblivious to this scene. They were too busy staging an impromptu reunion. Chet Morton and Biff Hooper, freed of their bonds, were busy shaking hands all round and trying to explain to their excited comrades some of the adventures they had gone through since leaving Bayport. Then the Hardy Boys were called on to explain how they had encountered the revenue cutter and how they had told their story and prevailed on the revenue men to come with them to Black Snake Island to effect the rescue of their chums. "But we can talk it over better on the way back," declared Frank. "Coming back with us?" asked the officer. "We're taking these men to Rock Harbor, but you're welcome to come along." "No, thanks. We'll be going back in the motorboats." "I see. Well, we'll take this gang back to the ship. Forward, march, you!" he shouted to the crestfallen gangsters. So the party returned to the shore, and Red Hawkins and his 4 men were herded into the boat. They had not said a word, but on their way back to the cutter, Red turned to the Hardy Boys and snarled, "Well, you've got me, but our men in the West got your father. We've got that much satisfaction anyway." With that, he lapsed into silence, realizing that his words had the immediate effect of dampening the spirits of the Hardy Boys and their chums. Back at the revenue cutter, Frank and Joe said goodbye to the officer and his men, leaving Red and his gang in their charge. The motorboat had been towed behind the ship, and they resumed their places in the Sleuth and Castaway. Tony Preto and the others took their places in the Napoli, while Chet and Biff returned to the Envoy. One of the captured boats turned out to be none other than Biff's own craft, which the gangsters had been using while they were prisoners in the cave. Thus the journey home began. Although there was rejoicing in the other boats and much good-natured badinage was passed about, the Hardy Boys found it difficult to be cheerful. Red's words had brought back to them their fears concerning the safety of their father, and they dreaded the news that might await them when they returned to Bayport. "If there is no news from him, I think we should go to Chicago and search for him," said Frank gravely. "I'm with you in that, but perhaps it won't be so bad. Red may have been only trying to frighten us." "I hope so. If that was his object, he sure succeeded. At any rate, we found the missing chums." "Another feather in our cap, eh?" grinned Frank. "If Dad does come back safely, he won't have any reason to be ashamed of his sons. The Mortons and the Hoopers will be glad. The whole city will be in a fuss over what happened to Chet and Biff." This proved to be the case. When the 3 motorboats returned to Barmet Bay and finally docked at Bayport, they found a cheering throng awaiting them, for the news had been sent to the city by the revenue men from Rock Harbor, and the anxieties of the boys' families were set at rest. The Hoopers and Mortons, in particular, had been almost frantic with worry about Chet and Biff, were given a welcome befitting heroes of an expedition given up for lost for many years. Nor were the Hardy boys and their chums forgotten in the welcome. Chet and Biff gave full credit to the Hardys for the part they had played in the roundup of the gangsters. When Frank and Joe were finally able to break away from the crowd and make their way back home, the news of the exploit was beginning to spread rapidly through the city. When they came within sight of the familiar house, they broke into a run. They raced up the front steps. They flung open the front door and burst into the hallway, almost knocking over Aunt Gertrude, who was dusting. "Land's sakes!" she exclaimed. "Can't you boys ever learn to come into a house properly? I've never seen the like in all my born days. Go right back out that door and come in again like gentlemen." "Home again!" exclaimed Frank with a grin. Then he turned anxiously to his aunt. "Any word yet from Dad?" "He's in the library," sniffed Aunt Gertrude. "In the library!" exclaimed the boys in astonishment. "Yes, in the library. And what of it? Where did you expect he'd be? Up in the attic?" But the Hardy boys did not wait to reply. With a whoop of delight, they rushed through the living room and into the library, where they found Fenton Hardy seated at the table. Their father got up quickly as they rushed at him, and in a moment all 3 were shaking hands and chattering in gladness and relief. "We heard you'd been caught by the gang," gasped Frank. Fenton Hardy smiled. "It was the other way around," he corrected them. "The gang was caught by me, and we caught the rest of them." "Not Red Hawkins and his crew?" The Hardy boys nodded. Their father gazed at them in incredulous astonishment for a moment. Then he slapped them heartily on the back and indicated the chairs nearby. "And I thought they'd clear out when they knew Baldy and the others were behind the bars. Why, this rounds up the entire pack. Tell me about it. But first of all, have Chet and Biff been found?" The boys nodded. "We found them on Black Snake Island. That's how we rounded up the gang. They captured Chet and Biff in mistake for us. They had 'em in a cave." Then, in the seclusion of the study, the Hardy boys told of their search for the missing chums, of their deduction that the boys might have gone to Black Snake Island, of their arrival on the island, and the finding of the gangsters and their cave. Fenton Hardy listened to the recital with sparkling eyes, for he realized that his sons had played a part that made him proud of them, and when the tale was finished, his approval was evident by the manner in which he pounded on the desk with his fist. "Fine!" he declared. "It was real detective work in the first place, and real grit and courage from then on. I'm very proud of my boys." "But all the time," added Frank, "we were worried about you. The men said you had been captured in the West." "It was a false report," said their father. "They thought they had captured me, but it wasn't for long. I played into their hands once, just to find out where they were all hiding, but I had another detective to shadow me, and when I found out where the gang were gathered, I gave the signal, and we rounded them up." "And now I hope the whole kit and billing of you will stay home for a while," declared a voice from the doorway. "I declare I never did see such a family, for the men folks to go gallivanting around the country and never stay at home. It's a wonder to me, Laura, that you put up with it." "Well," smilingly replied Mrs. Hardy, who had entered the room with Aunt Gertrude, "with 3 first-rate detectives in the family, I'm afraid I can't expect anything else, and they always come home again." Aunt Gertrude sniffed. "I'll guarantee that if I visit here much longer, I'll see that those 2 boys haven't much chance for more detectiving," she announced. I'll cure them, so I will. It's no business at all for boys." Mrs. Hardy smiled serenely. Fenton Hardy winked gravely at his sons, so Aunt Gertrude's threat did not greatly disturb them. There were to be more exciting adventures in store for the Hardy boys, and what some of these were will be related in the next volume of this series entitled The Hardy Boys, Hunting for Hidden Gold, a strenuous story of the West. "You're welcome to try, Aunt Gertrude," said Mr. Hardy, "but I'm afraid you'll never cure my sons of wanting to be detectives. I've set them the example, you see." "More's the pity," sniffed Aunt Gertrude. "Why couldn't you have been a plumber? It's safer." "But not as exciting," said Fenton Hardy with a laugh. The end. End of chapter 23. End of The Missing Chums by Franklin W. Dixon.